You know how it is trying to stay on top of everything with so much information coming at us constantly?
It's a lot.
So we're cutting through some of that noise today. We're doing a deep dive into a really interesting piece of potential legislation you brought to my attention.
That's right. We're focusing specifically on Section 302 of the proposed Forged Act.
The Forged Act, okay. And we've got excerpts of the proposed text right here. So our mission really is to get a handle on what Section 302 is trying to achieve, particularly how it might change the way the Department of Defense acquires its major systems.
Exactly. We want to break down what are these changes they're proposing and the why, what's the thinking behind this now, and maybe most importantly, the how.
Right, the how.
How might the DoD actually put these ideas into practice, and what should people maybe start thinking about to prepare for potential shifts?
Absolutely. And like we said, this is just one piece of the puzzle. We're looking at the Forged Act recommendations more broadly, and we'll cover other sections later. But today, it's all Section 302. The headline reads, Refining Acquisition Strategies for Major Defense Programs.
And when you start digging in, a few core themes really pop out. This idea of moving towards portfolio-based approaches.
Portfolio-based, okay.
More flexibility in how things are actually purchased, and a real push for more collaboration.
It definitely sounds like they're trying to make things more efficient, maybe spark some innovation in a world that's sometimes seen as, well, a bit slow-moving.
That seems to be the goal.
Now, to really get what Section 302 is aiming for, it probably helps to look back a bit, right? Because the current system, the defense acquisition system, that basic structure was put in place, back in the 70s?
The 1970s, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been around a while. We're talking nearly 50 years with this fundamental framework.
Exactly. And look, it was designed for order, for process, which you need when you're buying incredibly complex defense systems. But over the years, criticism started to surface.
Oh, definitely. And we saw in the materials organizations like the GAO, that's the Government Accountability Office, they put out reports highlighting how rigid the system can be, how slow to adapt sometimes.
For sure. And other reports, like from Congress itself, echoed that, pointing out that maybe the acquisition system wasn't keeping up with how fast threats evolve these days. Tech moves incredibly quickly.
It really does. And even when they tried updates, like remember the 2016 NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that had some initial steps towards more adaptive acquisition.
Right, they tried. But studies afterwards still found those underlying inefficiencies were, sticking around. Getting new tech integrated fast enough remained a big challenge.
So that kind of sets the stage for this Forged Act, Senate Bill 560 ND6, introduced late 2024. Section 302 feels like a pretty direct answer to these long-standing issues.
It really does seem that way. And it's interesting how the text mentions influences like the GAO, but also the Defense Science Board, pushing for these more agile portfolio-type approaches.
Yeah, it's like the experts were saying, hang on, maybe we need to think bigger picture about overall capabilities, not just one specific piece of gear at a time.
Exactly. And you even see hints of that in the language they use. They're removing older terms, things like major automated information systems. It suggests they're trying to, modernize the terminology itself.
Modernize the language, definitely. But I think more fundamentally, like you said, it's about shifting decision-making power. Specifically giving more clout to these portfolio acquisition executives, or PAEs.
PAEs, okay. So these folks would manage a whole collection of related programs, almost like a product line manager in the commercial world, but for defense capabilities. That does sound like a big change.
It really is. Okay, so let's get into the meat of Section 302 then. What's the main goal? What's the desired effect, as the material puts it?
Well, the big one seems to be shifting away from focusing so heavily on a single end item. One specific jet, one specific ship.
Right, the traditional way.
And instead, taking this broader view, looking at a whole portfolio of capabilities, the idea seems to be creating more flexibility, enabling faster fielding of tech when it's needed. It's like, instead of ordering one perfect custom-made suit that takes forever, you're managing a whole wardrobe system. Different pieces designed to work together, easily updated as styles or, needs change.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
Makes it clear. So fewer massive, decades-long programs for just one thing, and more like smaller, quicker updates across related systems.
Exactly that. And a really key part of this is pushing for what they call incremental delivery using mature technology.
Mature technology.
Okay.
So not necessarily the absolute riskiest bleeding-edge tech in every single update.
Maybe not always, no. The idea seems to be using tech that's already pretty well understood, reliable, That way, you can deliver useful capabilities faster in these smaller, more manageable chunks. It helps avoid those huge programs that risk being obsolete before they even get deployed.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Reduces the risk of huge delays, allows you to adapt more easily over time, like building with blocks almost.
Exactly like building with blocks, and it lets you make adjustments if, say, the mission changes or a new threat pops up midstream.
And what about this enhanced collaboration piece? Section 302 seems to be pushing for more outreach.
Oh, absolutely. Not just collaborating better within the usual defense circles, but reaching out to the wider science and tech community. And this seems key, reaching out to non-traditional contractors. Think startups, smaller tech firms.
Trying to pull in fresh ideas, maybe cutting-edge stuff faster.
That's the goal, yeah. Create a more dynamic innovation ecosystem around defense. Now, what about the long haul? Sustainment, maintenance, that's always a huge cost driver.
That's critical. And Section 302 apparently stresses integrating those sustainment thoughts and the technical data you'll need much, much earlier in the process.
So thinking about upkeep right from the design stage, not tacking it on later.
Precisely. If you build in maintainability from the start, you could save a lot of money and hassle down the line.
And pulling this all together, as we mentioned, is empowering those PAEs, the portfolio acquisition executives, and also requiring regular updates to the overall strategy.
Right. Giving PAEs more authority and making sure the strategies don't just sit on a shelf seems central to making this whole agile thing actually work. It's about building a more responsive management structure.
Okay, so that's the plan, the ideal outcome. But, any big change like this carries risks, right? The material did flag some potential negative impacts.
Absolutely. It's really important to think about the downsides. One that jumps out with this portfolio approach. Could oversight get diluted? If you're looking so broadly, do you miss problems brewing in one specific program within that bigger portfolio?
That's a fair question. If you lose that really deep focus on one item, could things get misaligned? Could capabilities drift away from the actual strategic need? You'd need some strong checks.
Yeah, it's like managing a big investment portfolio, isn't it? You can't just look at the total return. You got to check on each individual stock or bond.
Good analogy. And what about the incremental delivery? Great for flexibility, but could it lead to fragmentation, systems not quite fitting together?
Yes, that's a real risk.
Yeah.
How do you make sure all these bits and pieces, delivered maybe at different times by different people, actually integrate smoothly? Interoperability could become a huge headache.
A major headache. You'd need really clear integration benchmarks, like serious upfront planning to make sure it all connects into a working whole, not just a pile of parts.
Definitely. Then there's the collaboration push. Sounds good, bringing in more people, but could it just slow things down? The old too many cooks problem.
Yeah, the collaboration paradox, right. More input is good, but it can also mean more meetings, more approvals, potentially gridlock if it's not managed extremely well. Finding that balance is tricky.
It really is. And flexible resourcing, moving money around more easily. Good for adapting, sure, but could it also open the door to budget overruns if the controls aren't super tight?
Yes. Flexibility can't mean a free-for-all with the budget. You need strong accountability, especially for those PAEs managing the money for their portfolios.
Absolutely. That financial flexibility needs very careful handling and oversight.
And lastly, those frequent strategy updates. Good for agility, but could they also just create instability? Constant change, confusing everyone involved.
Change fatigue, yeah.
Yeah.
If those updates aren't communicated super clearly, consistently, it could cause more disruption than it solves.
Okay, so definitely some hurdles to watch out for. Did the analysis suggest ways to, mitigate these risks? Any safeguards?
It did. And it's important we mention, these mitigations were flagged in our analysis as being suggested by the AI based on its review of the material. So these are AI-suggested ideas for the DoD to consider.
Ah, right. AI suggestions. Interesting. Okay, so for that risk of diluted oversight in portfolios, what was the AI's idea?
The suggestion was mandating regular reviews by something called a Joint Requirements Planning Board, or JRPB. Basically, a high-level check to make sure the portfolios still line up with the big picture DoD goals. Sort of an extra layer of review.
Okay, that makes sense. Keep the strategic alignment in check.
Exactly. And for the fragmentation risk from incremental delivery, the AI suggested setting up clear integration benchmarks, measurable standards to ensure the pieces actually fit and work together, like technical guardrails for integration.
Sounds essential. A roadmap so all the blocks actually build something useful together. What about the too many cooks collaboration risk?
There, The AI suggested investing in collaboration training and, importantly, providing the right digital tools to help teams work together more efficiently. So not just telling people to collaborate, but giving them the skills and tech to do it without getting stuck. Smart. Focus on the how of collaborating. And for the budget overrun risk with flexible funding.
The suggestion was pretty straightforward. Enforce strict resource caps for each portfolio, and hold the PAEs directly accountable for staying within those limits. So more authority, but also very clear financial responsibility.
Tight controls, clear accountability. Makes sense. That accountability is key.
Absolutely. And finally, managing the potential disruption from frequent strategy updates.
The AI suggested standardizing the update protocols. Clear rules on how often updates happen, what info they need, how they're communicated, just bringing some predictable structure to the process to minimize confusion.
Right, structure for agility. Sounds good. So who in the DoD is going to feel these changes the most? Which roles are most affected by Section 302?
Top of the list has to be those portfolio acquisition executives, the PAEs. Their power, their scope, it really expands. They'll need serious strategic oversight skills, much more than just managing one program.
Yeah, it sounds like a fundamentally different job than a traditional program manager. Much bigger picture.
Definitely. Then you've got the service acquisition executives and the undersecretary for acquisition and sustainment. Their roles, their decision points, they'd likely have to adjust quite a bit to fit this portfolio model. The lines of authority might shift.
Ripples moving up the chain then.
For sure. And then the broader acquisition, workforce, PMs, contracting folks, engineers, they'd likely need significant retraining. Upskilling in things like agile methods, system integration across programs, thinking more strategically about the portfolio.
That upskilling piece feels absolutely critical for this to actually work.
No doubt. Now, big changes always meet some resistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who might push back against this and why?
Well, the analysis suggests traditional program managers might resist. They're used to owning their specific program, their end item. This portfolio view might feel like losing some of that direct control.
That's understandable. Their metrics, their feeling of ownership, it can all feel quite different.
Exactly. And the military services themselves, Army, Navy, Air Force system, they might have concerns too. They could worry that a portfolio approach leads to less customized systems for their unique needs, maybe more generic solutions.
Yeah, a fear of losing influence on systems critical to their specific missions. That's a potential friction point. And then what about contractors?
How might they react?
Well, think about it. Many big defense contractors are built around landing those huge long-term contracts for major platforms.
Right.
This shift towards potentially smaller, incremental projects, maybe working more with non-traditional companies, that could require some big adjustments to how they operate.
Adapting to a different rhythm, a different scale of work? Yeah, that could be a challenge, especially for the giants used to those massive deals.
So making this all happen requires resources, obviously. What kind of extra resources might be needed?
Absolutely. The material mentions needing dedicated funding for new portfolio management tools, new software, plus a big investment in training that workforce we talked about, agile methods, portfolio thinking.
The people and the tools to do the job.
Exactly. And you might even need more personnel just to handle the increased collaboration, the coordination, the testing across these interconnected portfolios. It's definitely not something you can do on the cheap.
Right. Crucial investments needed upfront. Okay, so how would we know if Section 302 is actually working? What are the potential measures of success? And again, let's remember, these were flagged as AI-suggested measures.
AI suggestions. Okay, first one, faster capability delivery. The target mentioned was cutting delivery time by 25%.
Wow, 25%. That's ambitious, but it's clear and measurable. Speed is a core goal here.
Definitely. If they hit that, it's a big win. Second, higher innovation adoption rates.
Getting more of that new tech actually into the systems being used.
Exactly. The aim mentioned was a 30% or more increase in adopting innovations. That would show if the collaboration push is actually working.
Ties right back to getting fresh ideas into defense. Makes sense.
And the third one is a bit softer. Stakeholder satisfaction.
Are the people involved happy with the new way of doing things?
Pretty much. The goal suggested was 80% or higher satisfaction tracked through existing DoD surveys or metrics. Because at the end of the day, if the people doing the work don't think it's an improvement, it's going to be hard to sustain.
That's a really important point. Buy-in is critical for long-term change.
So were there other ways to maybe get at these goals? Faster delivery, more innovation? The material did mention a couple of alternative approaches, again, flagged as potential alternatives from the AI.
Yeah, a couple of interesting ones. One was about uh, basically enhancing frameworks we already have.
Like beefing up the existing middle tier acquisition pathway. That's already supposed to be faster and more flexible for certain things.
Right. The thought being maybe you could expand that existing pathway, give it more resources, and get some of the desired flexibility without such a huge restructuring like Section 302 proposes. Maybe less disruptive or maybe complementary.
Interesting thought. What was the other alternative?
The other idea involved leveraging a really comprehensive digital strategy platform, using better software, better networks to improve coordination and communication across the whole acquisition system.
So a tech-driven approach. Streamline things with digital tools, maybe avoid some of the big organizational shifts in 302.
That seems to be the idea, yeah. Use technology to enable better collaboration and efficiency, perhaps without such dramatic changes to roles and structures.
Interesting alternatives to consider. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What's the bottom line on Section 302?
Okay, well, in a nutshell, Section 302 is really a major proposal aimed at making defense acquisition faster, more agile, more collaborative. It's about shifting focus from single items to managing whole portfolios of capabilities.
And the potential upsides are clear. Getting needed tech to the warfighter faster, bringing in more cutting-edge innovation, and ideally getting more bang for the taxpayer buck.
But, and it's a big but, there are real risks. Oversight challenges, integration complexity, managing all that collaboration, keeping budgets under control. These all need serious attention and mitigation strategies.
And success really seems to depend on strong leadership, putting the right resources and training in place, and crucially, getting everyone involved from the top brass to the program teams to actually buy into this new way of thinking. It's a heavy lift.
It really is. So for everyone listening, the main takeaway from our deep dive today is that Section 302 of the Forged Act could represent a really fundamental change in how the DoD buys things. This focus on flexibility, collaboration, portfolios could really shake up defense procurement. It's worth thinking about how these potential changes might affect how you see or interact with the defense world.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our final thought, something for you to chew on. We know defense acquisition has struggled with challenges for a long, long time, and managing these big, complex portfolios isn't easy. So thinking about everything we've discussed in Section 302, what do you think the single biggest practical hurdle will be to making this actually work effectively on the ground?